So this is just kind of me going through some of my workflow tips with shooting stylistic portraits. So let's start with this photo here, and we'll head into the edit module. I'll wait till it loads here. It's a pretty big RAW file. I tend to shoot RAW whenever I'm shooting portraits that are kind of just stagnant and I'm not having any motion, just because I can go back and I can modify any of the tones and colors with a lot more power than if it was shot with a JPEG photo. So I have this shot here, and it's obviously a little bit warm. There's a lot of greens in the shot. So what we're going to do first to this photo is I'm just going to correct for the color. So I'm going to go into my Develop tab here, and inside my Tone and Color pane, I'm going to head down to my color options, and I'm actually just going to pull back on the temperature to cool it down, maybe to about there. You'll see that it took out a lot of that green cast from our photo. But now we need to develop our tone. So that means we got to go up and we need to modify some of these exposure, highlights, mid-tone sliders so that we can get a nicely exposed shot. Well, with this photo, I'm taking a look at these eyes here, and they're actually quite well exposed. I mean, they're a little bit underexposed in the areas that could use a little bit of touch up with color, but they're not looking too bad. So I'm actually not going to pull up on the exposure slider just yet. I'm actually going to head down to my mid-tone slider here, and I'm actually going to pull up on that first. So watch as I pull up on my midtones, how that just kind of brightens up those nice little gray areas in my photograph. That's just allowing me to brighten up my shot without actually brightening the entire photo. Whereas if I use this exposure slider here and I pulled up on it, it's going to bring brightness and exposure into my entire shot. Well, I want to modify the tone so that I only pull out some of these tones in her midtones and her shadows, so that I only need to boost up this exposure just a little bit so that I don't run into any blown out or too much highlighted areas. So now I'm going to go down now that I've modified this mid-tone slider, and I'm just going to pull up on the shadows a little bit. And that actually looks pretty well exposed right there. So now all I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of contrast by pulling in some true black. So I'm just going to pull back on this true black slider. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to hold down my J key, and that's going to show me my true white and true black points. So if I pull back on the black slider here, I'm just going to add in just enough until I see a little bit of true black on her. Maybe about there. And now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, we've really elevated the tone and color in this photo, and we've removed a lot of that green color cast. And I know I said I wasn't trying to pull up on the exposure slider, but I'm actually just going to pull up on it just a hair, maybe about a quarter of a stop, just to bring in a little bit more of an exposure boost. Right, probably there. That looks good right about there. So now that we've modified our photo to kind of suit the tone and color needs we were looking for, now we can go into our effects and our local adjustments, and then we can start adding different creative styles to it. So whenever you're modifying portraits, I would recommend developing that tone and color first inside your Develop tab here. And once you've set that foundational look for your photo, then I would head into effects, and now you can start getting creative with the filters. So the first filter I want to add onto this photo is I'm actually going to add dynamic contrast. And I know people are like, whoa, you don't want to add detail to her skin. Well, the great thing about Photo RAW is that you can actually mask in any of these filters and effects. So I'm only going to apply dynamic contrast to her eyes, her eyebrows, and her lips. So I'm just going to add a filter. I'm going to add dynamic contrast. And I'm going to head into my masking options. And I'm going to invert that mask. So now I'm just going to take my masking brush. I'm going to hold down Shift and hit X so it sets it to paint in. Just going to increase my masking brush size. And I'm just going to paint a little bit of this dynamic contrast on her eyebrows, her eyelashes, and then I'll put a little bit on her lips as well. And maybe a little bit up here. There we go. Some of that detail in her hair. Perfect. So now if we turn this off and on, does a good job of applying details selectively and kind of bringing out those nice little small areas of detail within her eyebrows and her eyelashes. So now let's add another filter here, and I'm going to add a split tone filter. And the reason I'm adding a split tone filter is because I want to bring in a little bit more stylistic color to my photo. So I'm going to add a split tone filter, and I'm going to head to my preset styles, and I'm going to use my favorite one, which is this warm preset. And I really like how this looks on my shot if I turn it off and on, because in my highlights area, it's using this nice sort of orange color to bring in that nice skin tone. And then in my shadows, there's a kind of a darker blue down here. So it's kind of cooling off those green areas in the shadows as well. Well, down here below my highlights and shadows, I have this mode. And I'm actually going to change this mode to color so that the split toning is strictly on the color. Whereas with normal, you get this kind of faded matte look with the split toning. So I'm just going to choose this color option. So now if I turn this off and on, it's very subtle, but you'll see it does a nice job of removing some of that green and orange color cast from her skin. Just like that. So the next filter I want to add, I'm actually going to add a filter that brings in a little bit of sunshine to my shot. Whenever you're shooting portraits and you go back into the editing room and you have a portrait like this where there's a little bit of sun touching your skin, or there's kind of rays coming in on different areas of her face, I would recommend going in, adding a filter, and adding a sunshine filter. It's really going to help out your photo because when you apply a sunshine filter, it brightens up the highlighted and bright areas in your photo, and it kind of removes some of the brightness from the darker areas. So it makes the darker areas darker and brightens up the highlights. So you get this sort of sunshine look on your shot, and it looks awesome, awesome, awesome on photos where you actually have kind of a little bit of different areas of contrast on your face with the different areas of sun coming into it. So if I turn this off and on, I mean, you can see already it does an awesome, awesome job of really just bringing in a little bit of pop to the photo. I'm actually going to add another sunshine filter. And I'm going to go in and I'm going to another sunshine filter. And for this sunshine filter, I'm actually going to go and choose a preset style. And I'm going to choose this sun glow preset style. And the reason I like this sun glow preset style is because it brings in a nice bit of glow, softness, and sort of warmth into my photo. But I don't want it applied to her face here. I want her face exactly how it was without this sunshine filter applied to it. But I like how this looks around the rest of her body, kind of around her hair. I'm actually going to go into my sunshine filter here, and I'm going to invert this mask. And now I'm just going to brush this onto the areas that I want it to be applied to. Boom. So now if I turn this off and on, does a good job of bringing in that nice sort of glow around her face while maintaining this sort of nice subtle look that we've maintained by using our develop tab here. Just gonna go and brush a little bit of this in. I probably could have not even inverted that mask and just painted out her face, but oh well, we're here now. Cool. So now I have that filter applied and it's bringing in that nice sort of glow around her skin. So now what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna apply another filter, and I'm going to apply a filter that sort of adds a little bit of contrast and a bit of color. And a great filter for that is this photo filter filter. This photo filter is basically emulating what a photo filter would look on your lens. So I'm going to go into these more styles, and I'm going to choose this polarizer option. And you'll notice right away that by using this polarizer option, if I turn this off and on, it really does an awesome job of bringing in some of that nice contrast and some of those nice colors for my photo. But because it is a polarizer look, you might get it a little bit too warm or too cool depending on the subject in your photo. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go down into my color, and I'm going to choose a sort of light blue color. And the reason I'm doing that is because I want to bring in a little bit of blue color into her eyes And also I kind of want to remove some of this green-orange color cast on her skin. But I like the way the polarizer filter adds in that contrast. So I'm just going to use that color that I selected, that light blue. And I'm actually going to pull up on the amount a little bit. Probably about right there. Let's see, let's turn this off and on. Yeah, that looks great like that. And I'm actually going to go in and I'm going to brush this out from her hair, because you can see that if I put this on, it makes her hair kind of blue up here and it makes it look a little awkward. Also down on her shoulder down here, it's a little bit too contrasty on her shoulder and it kind of looks distracting. So I'm just going to use my masking brush again. I'm going to use paint out. And I'm just going to brush this off the areas that I don't want it to be applied to. But now if I zoom in on her face, let me just show you what this filter does to her eyes. So now look at her eyes, and if I turn this photo filter off and on, it brings in some blue, it brings in some contrast, and we can always, after this, go into our local adjustments and we can fix the eyes a little bit. But for now, the style is looking awesome, so we're just gonna keep going with this sort of sun glow style. So the next filter I'm gonna add is the last filter I wanna apply to this shot. And I'm actually gonna add a filter that I hardly ever use, which is this lens flare filter. And for this filter, I'm gonna go into my type and I'm gonna choose Sunspot. And whenever you apply this lens flare filter and you choose Sunspot, it's gonna bring in sort of a faded, sunspotty lens flare look onto your shot. What I tend to do is I go down into my tint area, or right below tint, and I go to my fade and I just pull that to 0. Because I don't want any of that fade on my photo. I just kind of want these little light rays to add just kind of lines of light in my shot. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go up to my rays and I'm going to make them maybe about 40, just so there's 2 or 3 or 4 kind of coming across her face right here. Then I'm going to use this little option here. This is so you can move your lens flare around. And I'm going to move this up kind of over here in the corner where you can't see the flare of it. And now I'm just going to go over to my amount and I'm going to pull it down to like 4. But now watch as I turn this off and on. See how it brings in kind of just little light rays of light beaming across her face, still maintaining this nice bit of contrast that we have from the separation of the dark and the light on her face. So this lens flare filter, if you use it kind of sparingly and just really light on your shot, it can bring in a nice bit of style to it. So perfect. I think that looks good as far as the tonality inside of Develop and the filters inside of Effects. So let's actually go into our Local Adjustments tab and let's paint in a little bit of light, and then we'll actually add in some exposure to her eyes. So I'm just gonna go into my Local Adjustments tab here. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna bring in some exposure into the areas that are exposed on her face. So I'm just gonna choose this Lighten option. And now with my adjustment brush selected, I'm just gonna paint this on, kind of not really looking at the lines, not trying to stay in any sort of grid or anything. Just paint it on, because you can always go back and lower the opacity. So this is gonna look pretty strong, but we're gonna go back and we're gonna make it look more natural, so have no fear. And we'll just kind of go through and just paint some light on our model here. Just to add in some more contrast, some more depth. Let's do that. Okay, cool. So I'm just gonna go to my opacity. Obviously it's super intense. So just pull it down to 0. And then just, incrementally. Pull it up by like 11, 12. Just kind of gradually pull up on it until it's a little bit too strong. That's probably perfect. Maybe, let's try 35. Cool. So now if we turn this off and on, See how it adds in a nice bit of light in these areas around her face? And we can make it even look more natural by pulling back on it just a little bit more. And now we're gonna do the opposite, where we actually remove light from these darker areas on her face. So to do that, we're actually gonna go into this local adjustment masking options. And I'm gonna copy this mask that we painted on for the brighter areas. Then I'm gonna add a new local adjustment layer. I'm gonna go into it, into the masking options, and I'm just gonna paste this mask. And I'm gonna invert it. And now you're gonna do the same thing, pull back on the opacity, and then just incrementally boom. So now if I turn this off and on, we have a little bit more contrast between these bright and dark areas on our face. So the last thing I want to do this shot is I'm just going to add in a little bit more light into these eyes. They look amazing already, but let's just apply a little bit more detail and some color. I'm going to add a new local adjustment layer. I'm going to go into my More Styles, and I'm going to choose Magic Eye Fixer. And the Magic Eye Fixer is going to increase your exposure. It's going to bring in some structure, and it's going to remove some of that haze, so you get a nice kind of little pop of detail and brightness on the area that you brush this into. So let's just brush this on our eyes, and it's going to be really intense at first. But like we were doing earlier, we can always go back and we can modify the opacity. Oops, a little overboard with the brushing. There we go. Now we'll just go over to the opacity, lower it to 0, and then again, just kind of incrementally. And with eyes, you got to be careful. You can't do it too much or it looks really, really unnatural. So I would really recommend going to 0 and then just incrementally pulling it up. I think probably there is about good. And let's go to like 30 so you guys can see it. Boom, that's a lot better. Okay, so now I just want to add one last filter. I know I said that lens flare was the last filter, but I just want to add one more, and it's one of my favorites, and it's a vignette, and it'll take 2 seconds. And we'll just add Big Softy just to finish it up. And then I'll move this vignette to the center. And then we'll just lower the opacity for that vignette a little bit. Cool. So now let's hit the backslash key on our keyboard and see what we created. So from that to this, just by modifying some sliders in Develop, adding some different filters, and then applying some local adjustments. All right, well, let's head on to the next shot here. And for this particular photo, this next one, I'm just gonna do sort of more of a light, airy look. So let's grab this photo and let's do sort of a dreamy, sort of light springtime summer air style to this photo. Once it loads, again, they're huge raw files. Cool, so I have this photo here, and I actually just cropped it because there was this beam of light. I had a diffuser in my arm and I was holding the camera and I couldn't quite get it to cover her hair over here. So I basically just cropped a line right where it goes over her hair. But I actually really liked how the photo turned out. So let's go ahead and let's modify it. So I'm actually gonna head into Develop, and I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna modify this camera profile. Because I was shooting RAW, I have the ability to choose a different camera profile. So I'm gonna go in and I'm gonna choose this ON1 Portrait. And you'll notice right away that it does an awesome job of just kind of brightening up and neutralizing the shot a little bit. So that's why I tend to go in and choose these different camera profiles, because they can really make your photo look a lot different than it was when you shot it in camera. Okay, so now with this photo, because we want sort of this light, dreamy, airy look, we're gonna have to modify the exposure first. So I'm gonna go in, I'm gonna pull up on the exposure about a half a stop, right there. Nothing, probably more than a half, maybe a little bit more. That's probably perfect. Because we're gonna go in and we're gonna modify different filters and we're gonna use these other sliders to really kind of pull out the tones we want. So we've set our exposure and we've set this camera profile. Now we're gonna use my 2 favorite sliders, which are the midtones and the shadows. We're just gonna pull up on those, maybe a little higher. There we go, right there. And now because we pulled up on so many of those tones, especially these shadow tones here, the images look, or this image looks quite flat. Well, whenever you pull up on these shadow tones, you're gonna bring in some sort of flatness element to your shot. So it's always good to either go back in, add some contrast, or what I like to do, and what we did with that last photo, is I'm just gonna use this black slider here. I'm gonna click on it, and I'm gonna hold down J, and just, like we did earlier, pull back on it until you see kind of the amount of true white and true black you want. It's probably good right there. Perfect. So now we've added in some of that contrast again that we lost when we pulled up on the shadow tones. And I think for color, it looks pretty good. Yeah, I'm actually not going to modify the color too much. If I want to, I can go into effects and modify it there. Okay, so now let's go into effects and we can start adding the creative filters to the shot. And the first filter I want to add to kind of bring in this light, airy look is a curves filter. We're going to add a filter and we'll add curves here. And if you're not familiar with the tone curve, just a real quick recap, this bottom left area is your black. So it's your black points. This middle area is your midtones. And then you have your highlights and your true white up here. So this little area is your shadows. This little area would be your highlights. And then you can just kind of pull up or down on your tone curve to give the look that you want. Well, for this photo, we want sort of an airy, light, maybe even a tad overexposed shot. So let's just grab our midtones, and I'm going to pull up on them quite a bit. Maybe about right there. Just to bring in some nice highlights and midtones into the photo. But because we did that, you'll notice we lost some of that contrast we added earlier. Well, to fix that, we can actually head back down into this tone curve area, and in the shadow point region of our tone curve, I can grab it, and if I just pull down on it a little bit, it will add in a little bit more of that shadow and contrast into my photo. But be careful not to add too much because you'll add in too much color, and it can look kind of muddied up. So let's just go about right there. Perfect. So now what we want to do, since we actually did kind of pull down on that contrast, it did bring in a little bit too much orange to this photo. So to fix that, we're actually going to add a color enhancer filter. Color enhancer. And in color enhancer, much like color adjustment, you can go down into your color range and you can modify specific colors. Well, because I was looking at this photo and there's quite a bit too much orange, I'm just going to go over to my color range. I'll grab my orange. And now watch as I remove some of this orange from her complexion. You can see how much orange was on her already by pulling up on that curve slider, or curves filter rather. Let's just remove a little bit of that orange just so she's not oversaturated. That looks about perfect right there. Maybe let's make it a little bit brighter. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. So now if we turn this off and on, we've kind of taken some of that really orange cast off of her body and kind of left her with that more natural complexion. So now we can add some other stylistic filters. And the next one I want to add is one of my favorites, and I kind of explained why earlier, but it's this sunshine filter. And I'm going to apply it, and I'm going to use this strong preset. And I'm only going to apply that to this side of my portrait. I don't want this applied to her face at all. I kind of want to bring in sort of a blown out area into the frame, just so all of the detail and the correct exposure is all on her face. So because I want this only applied to this left area, I'm going to hit M on my keyboard to grab my masking bug. I'm going to go up to my preset, and I'm going to choose linear right. That means the right side won't have the filter applied, and the left side will. So I'll just drop it down here. And now I'll just kind of pull up on this fade a little, or the feathering a little bit, sorry, to make it a little bit more natural. And now if I turn this off and on, you'll see it does an awesome job of just kind of blowing out this area, bringing in some sunshine and glow, and really making it look like it was a light, airy vibe that day. So now that we've modified the sunshine, I'm going to add another filter, And I'm actually going to apply a filter that I can go in and just kind of sharpen up her eyes a little bit here. I must have had it off focus a tad because you can see there's not quite as much focus on this eye here that there is here. But we can correct that by adding in a sharpening filter. So I'm just going to add a filter, and I'm going to add sharpening. And I only want it to apply to her eyes. So we'll go into our sharpening mask, and we'll invert the mask. Now, like we did earlier, we'll use our masking brush, set to paint in. And now we can just kind of brush in a little bit of sharpness to her eyes and her eyebrows. And let's just do some on her lips as well. So now if I zoom out and I turn this off and on, does an awesome job of applying that sharpening and bringing in some micro contrast and detail. And I can always go over to my sharpening filter. I'm actually going to remove some of that halo so it's not so big. And then I'm going to modify the amount to add in just a little bit more. Perfect. You'll see that kind of fixed the focus on her eyes right there. So now what I want to do, as far as filters go, is I'm actually going to add a vignette filter. But I'm going to add a vignette and make it white so that we can kind of even blow out these areas a little bit more. So let's add a filter. We'll add a vignette. And in this more preset style menu, I'm going to zoom down and I'm going to click white vignette. And I'm going to move this over to her eyes like that. And now I'm just going to modify the opacity so that it's not so intense. Maybe like that. So we turn this off and on. Yes, it brings in that nice kind of light, airy feel over here. Kind of remove some of these areas as distractions, while really focusing the viewer's attention on these eyes. So we're doing a good job. We just have a couple more things to do to this photo. And the first thing I want to do is I want to bring in some more darkness to this area over here. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to go in and I'm going to apply a local adjustment layer. So let's apply a local adjustment layer. I'll make sure it's set to darken. And now I'm just going to grab my adjustment bug by holding down Shift and hitting K on my keyboard. Or you can grab it by your local adjustment brush and then this top toolbar here. Now I'm just going to drop this down with a preset linear left so that the darkness is being applied to the right. Drop it down. It didn't even do it. There we go, that looks better. And now we'll just fade this quite a bit, or feather it quite a bit. I keep getting those two words mixed up, sorry. And there we go. We turn that off and on. Actually, let's make it a little bit less strong. Just fade it up, or feather it really. It's fine. Perfect. Okay, so now that we've got sort of this left area blown out, have that dreamy look, and we've really corrected this exposure on her face, I'm just going to do the same thing like I did earlier with the local adjustments and just bring in a little bit more pop to her eyes. I'm just going to add a new adjustment. I'm going to go into this more, and I'm going to choose Magic Eye Fixer. Now, same thing. Hit K on the keyboard. Brush this on her eyes a little bit. Perfect. Now we'll just lower the opacity to 0, and then just kind of click. A little bit more so you guys can see it. Cool. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, done a good job of kind of creating this nice light and airy feel with the portrait by adding in some local adjustment layers over here and also that white vignette. And for this photo, I was thinking more of like a moody stylistic look. We did sort of the kind of the color pop in the trees style look. And for this one, I was thinking a nice kind of moody portrait would be good. So for this shot, I don't know if I need to modify too much of the color. I think it's got sort of a nice, well-rounded color to it. It may be a little bit too cold, but we won't know for sure until we modify the tones. So let's go into develop here. And I'm just gonna pull up on the exposure a little bit. Actually, let's see what these camera profiles are. Yep, I'm gonna use portrait. It just looks so much better. Boom. So now I'm gonna pull up on the exposure, just a hair, maybe like half a stop again. Then a little bit of my midtones, just a hair. And then we'll pull up on the shadows again, just a little bit. Because if you pull up too much, you're gonna make just kind of a weird looking shot. You're gonna get grain. So just a bump in the shadows. Just a nice little bump to the shadows. Perfect. It's looking a little flat, so we can always go up and we'll add a little bit more contrast. Right there. Perfect. Now what I want to do is I'm actually going to go into my effects tab here. We've kind of set the basic tone for this shot. Just going to go into my effects tab here. I'm going to add a filter. And we're going to bring in some mood to this photo by adding a few different filters to it. And the first one's going to be a split tone filter. And the reason I'm adding a split tone filter is because I want to modify some of the tones in her skin and the tones around her. So I'm going to use this same mode, and I'm going to choose, oops, it's already on color. Okay, so I'm going to use that same color mode so I don't get that fade on my photo. And now I'm going to play with these sliders here. So actually, let's use warm. Yep, I'm going to use that warm preset style again, sorry. And I'm actually going to modify these highlights and these shadow sliders. So for the balance, I'm actually going to pull up on the balance a little bit so that it kind of blends in a little bit more with the photo. And then I'm going to add a little bit more into the highlights, just to bring in some of that warmth, because this photo is a little bit cool. Maybe about right there. And now my shadows, I'm also going to add a little bit more into the shadows. Like right about there. I like that. There we go. So you see how that kind of really warmed this photo up and removed some of that kind of blue color cast? I'm actually going to remove some of that. There we go. See, I wanted color. There we go. Okay. So now the mode's good. Our split toning is good to go. Now let's add another filter. I'm going to add another sunshine filter. And this time I'm just going to use natural. So that does a good job of bringing in some nice sun to her. I'm actually going to go over and I'm going to warm that up a little bit more too. Perfect. So now to add kind of the moody look to a photo, we're going to add a curves filter. And inside curves, you can pull up on your black point, which will bring in sort of that matte look that a lot of those moody photos have. So let's add a filter, and I'm going to add curves. And down here, like I was explaining earlier, is your black point. Well, most people know that, or I'm assuming that some people know, or most people know, that if you pull up on your black, you're going to get some of that faded look because it's, you know, trying to pull out the darkest of darks in your shot. So watch as I pull up on this black point here, and if I move it in, I get sort of that nice faded matte look on my photo, and it brings in sort of that moody style I was looking for. Well, because it brings in sort of that fade and it flattens the photo, to add back in contrast, you could just go down into your shadow tones and you could pull down on it, and watch as I'm pulling down on it, and it's really just kind of adding that contrast and color back in. Let's go there, and then let's just boost the highlights a tad. Let's turn this off and on. It gives a nice sort of moody look to this photo. So now what we're going to do is we're going to actually add some dynamic contrast again to bring out some of the details in her eyelashes and her eyebrows here. So let's add another filter. We'll add dynamic contrast. We'll actually invert it again. And now we can brush this on just kind of largely on this area here, here, and then we'll apply it to her lips also. Perfect. So now we have a little bit more sharpness to the eyes and the lips. Now we can go in and we'll add a little bit more mood by adding a filter. And some of the moodiest filters are definitely going to be your bleach bypass and your grunge filter. So adding either of those is going to bring in quite a bit of mood to your shot. So I'm actually going to add this bleach bypass filter. And I'm going to use this darker preset. And I'm actually going to pull back on the opacity quite a bit. Probably about right there. And I'm actually going to head down to this tint area. I'm going to grab this tint and I'm going to pull it down to really, really dark. And it's going to be nice and blue. And now watch as I add just a little bit of that amount. There we go. There, now it's kind of adding that sort of moody look to this photo. Let's add another filter, and I'm actually going to go in and add a vignette. And the reason I'm using a vignette is just because I want to remove some of these areas in the corners as distractions, just so it kind of focuses on the viewer, or the model right here. So we'll just add big Saki. I'm actually going to make it pretty big. And then I'm going to change the middle of it to go around your eyes here. So now if I turn this vignette off and on, see how that really cleans up kind of those areas that were kind of overexposed over here? So now let's go in and I'm going to add a local adjustment layer just to deal with the darker area of her face here. I really want to accentuate this bright area where the sun was hitting, and I can kind of, tone this area down a little bit. That'll create some nice contrast between the two sides of her face. So let's go into our local adjustments. Make sure I'm set to darken, adjustment gradient. Then I'll just drop this down on the middle of her face. And I'll just flip it to the other side. And now we can just play with the feathering a little bit. And I'm actually going to pull this over. Maybe a little bit less. Perfect. So now if I turn this off and on, see how that brings in some nice kind of contrast between this really bright area on her face over here and really subdues those highlights? I think that looks amazing. Perfect. So now we'll just do the same thing like we were doing earlier. We'll add another local adjustment layer, use my more preset styles, and I'll use that magic eye fixer, and then I'll just brush this in once again. And I'll just lower the opacity, and there we go. Cool. So now let's hit the backslash key on our keyboard. And now we have sort of a nice moody shot for our stylistic portraits. All right, so for this particular photo, let's do a nice crop. I'm just gonna kind of remove some of this bottom area below her jeans here, and then we can crop some of this area top. Let's just hit C on our keyboard. I'm gonna use a nice 4x5, and I'm just gonna pull in just until we have sort of a nice profile photo here, and then I'll just move right to the middle. All right, there, boom. There we go. So with this particular photo, the first thing I wanna do is just kind of pull out some of the tones in the shot. Looks like it's a pretty well exposed photo, so I might only need to just change my camera profile. I'm just gonna go in, I'm gonna change my profile to portrait. Let's see how that looks. Actually, I'm kind of digging the standard. So let's just use standard. And I'm gonna pull up on my midtones. And a little bit of exposure. There we go. A little bit of the shadows. And for this particular photo, with this kind of nice white shirt she's wearing, I'm actually going to pull up on the whites a little bit to bring in just a little bit more brightness into her dress, just so it's not so stagnant. If I turn this off, it's just really kind of flat. So if I pull up on those whites, it brings in a little bit more kind of flair to the photo. So now we have sort of our basic tonality set. What I want to do is I want to bring in some of these colors around her, but I don't want to have a lot of that color applied to her skin. So let's try to do that inside of this color pane here by just going in and going into the vibrance slider, just pulling up on it a little bit. You see that does a good job of applying some color behind her, but it brings in a lot of that orange and yellow onto her complexion. I'm actually going to leave that vibrance where it's at, and I'm going to modify the color with a filter. I'm just going to go into my effects tab. I'll add a filter. I'm just going to add color adjustment. And the reason I'm choosing color adjustment is because there's specific colors on this photo that I want to increase. For example, the blues in her shorts, the white in her shirt, the greens and yellows behind her, and this red on her lips. But I don't want any of this orange or any of that to be applied on her skin. So let's actually remove that orange first by going into our orange slider and just pulling down on the saturation. And you'll see right away that it'll remove some of that nice orange from her skin. Right about right there. And now we can go in, and there's a few different ways you can actually modify the color. I don't know what your guys' personal preference is, but I typically actually just choose the color and then modify it. I kind of came from Lightroom, so it's a lot easier that way. But if you guys just want to pick a color with this color dropper, I would recommend going in, clicking Adjust Saturation, use this color dropper, and then you can just drop it on an area of color, and then you can increase it. See how that's increasing that green behind her and really bringing out those tree colors? I think that looks awesome like that. So let's just leave that pretty high. Okay, so now let's go in. I'll add a little bit more yellow as well. So that's bringing in some of that vibrance in the back as well. And then we'll go into our red. See her lips? There we go. Let's do maybe right there. And then we'll just boost it up a tad. Actually, yeah, let's boost it up. There we go. Boom. Now let's zoom out. And I'm actually going to modify one more color. And I'm going to actually modify these blues. I'm going to increase the saturation a little bit. Because if I do zoom in on these shorts here, and I remove the saturation, it kind of looks a little flat. So I'm just going to bring in a little bit more of it. And then maybe we'll remove some of the brightness. Perfect. So now if we turn this color enhancer, or color adjustment off and on, does a really good job of bringing out those colors behind her, the color on her jeans, and removing that orange cast from her skin. Let's add another filter here, and I'm actually going to add dynamic contrast. And again, I don't want this applied to her skin because obviously it looks a little bit crunchy. So we can just go in. I'm going to use a color range mask. I'm going to drop it on her skin color. And then I'm going to invert that mask. And now I'll just play with the color range. Let me view it actually. Now if we view this again, actually adds in some nice detail into the areas we want. I didn't want really too much detail on this blouser just because you can't really see. It's kind of blown out areas in there. But if you look at the jeans and then the area behind her, does an awesome job of applying detail without actually crunching up her skin. So now let's add another filter. And I'll add one of my favorites. I'm gonna add the sunshine just because it does so much to your shots. I mean, just look at that, just by adding that one filter. It's like the perfect filter for photos if you're shooting them in the sun. I'm actually gonna pull back on the saturation a little bit though, and also the temperature just because it's a little bit too warm. Okay, so now let's add a vignette. And I'll just use Big Socky again. We'll pull up on it to her face. And I'll just pull that down really lightly, and I just want it to be just a little bit, just so it kind of subdues this area by her front legs. Perfect. And let's actually add a filter. And let's add some film grain. I'm actually going to turn it up quite a bit. Yeah, let's get a nice film portrait. And then I'll add another filter. Let's actually add just vintage. And then let's do warm. Boom. So now if we hit the backslash key on our keyboard, it's a really good job of just kind of adding in some filters, applying different sliders in them, and then just modifying our develop tone and color. So really easy if your model does have some blemishes or any kind of small imperfections on their skin. Your best bet at removing those, once this photo loads, your best bet at removing these is going into your fix options here from your left toolbar. So this is going to house your perfect eraser, your retouch brush, and your clone stamp tool. So this perfect eraser is great for just removing small imperfections and blemishes and lines and things like that. Your retouch brush is great for acne or really tiny imperfections on her skin. So if I want to remove kind of just this little area right here, I would probably use the retouch brush. Drop this down on that. There we go, and then it'll remove it right away. It might not work with this one just because it's a little bit stronger, but we'll see. It's pretty good at kind of removing those blemishes. Did an okay job. It might be a job for the perfect eraser though. So you just kind of play with it, Gene. Maybe use the perfect eraser for larger things like that, or if they're just kind of small imperfections, you could use the retouch brush. But let's use this perfect eraser. I think this will work perfectly. And then just drop it down. There you go. And so yeah, the perfect eraser might work a little bit better if you have some larger blemishes on their skin, but